hypothesis, what is currently believed, you know, what we thought what happened last year. All right, we're just going to say that if things are the same, we'll call that the null hypothesis. Sometimes it will involve a decision that needs to be made if the null hypothesis is rejected. So suppose our status quo null hypothesis is that the machine is operating properly. All right, and we're going to need overwhelming evidence before we scrap this $1 million machine and assume the alternative that the machine is functioning improperly. If I go too fast, just slow me down here. Different forms of hypothesis tests. We talked about a one-tailed test. All right, say we assume that the mean is greater than some amount. Well, then that's going to be a one-tailed test with the rejection region in the lower tail. We could have the opposite, one-tailed test with the rejection region in the upper tail. Or we could have a two-tailed test. If the null hypothesis says the mean is equal to some amount, there are going to be two rejection regions. Two ways to disprove that. And of course, for a two-tailed test, remember we take the significance level, cut it in half when we develop those rejection regions, and we double the p-value at the end. And that whole thing, well, what's the likelihood of a sample mean being that high? All right, well, that's a certain probability, but the probability of a sample mean being that far away from the mean, we need to double the probability that we find on the z table. Okay, the one-tailed test, just like the two-tailed test, uses the sampling distribution of the sample mean. Remember at the beginning I said, do we have a tool that would tell us the probability of this sample outcome, given what the realtor said is true? We do have a tool. It's called the sampling distribution of the sample mean. We chose a significance level. We had a great discussion about how do we choose a significance level. Some people said 10%, some people said 1%. Well, once we choose it, that's going to be our threshold for what we're willing to believe. We set up that decision rule. We applied the decision rule. We talked briefly about how we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Just to be safe, never say you accept the null hypothesis. We talked about p-values, and there'll be a slide with the 4-step procedure of how we approach hypothesis tests. Okay, so sampling distribution of the sample mean, this is the tool to tell us how likely any sample outcome would be given that the null hypothesis is true. One-tailed test, for example, we would say you are supposing that the mean is higher than some certain amount, all right, this amount, higher than 0. All right, I'm going to say that I want to look at my sample results. Anything above 0, I'm going to say, okay, you're probably right. Anything less than 0, I'm going to be suspicious. A lot less than 0, I'm going to be not only suspicious, but I'm going to go on record and I'm going to say I reject what you're saying. I think what you're saying is not true. That's based on our significance level, and we could set up a critical value for that. We could do the same thing if we're an upper tail test. If you tell me that the mean is lower than some certain amount, then my rejection region is going to be up here. I'm going to go out, I'm going to get some sample data, and I'm going to assign that sample a z statistic. Just like we assigned Vander Holyfield a z-stat for his height, we're going to assign your sample data a z statistic. And you're going to say, how likely is this sample data given that the null hypothesis is true? How far away is my sample data from the assumed population mean? And more specifically, how many standard deviations above or below is it? Statisticians typically refer to any sample result that leads to rejecting a null hypothesis as statistically significant. Have you ever heard someone say that to you before? It's statistically significant? Chances are they probably didn't know what they were talking about, right?
The news.
The news, okay, all right, fine, the news. But I'm talking like your friends. Do your friends ever tell you it's statistically significant?
No.
We grew up in different neighborhoods. So, alright, so now you know what statistically significant means. It means that you have overwhelming evidence based on a hypothesis test. We're going to choose a significance level, and we talked about that. This separates likely from unlikely. A significance level is the probability that defines just what we mean by an unlikely sample result under the assumption that the null hypothesis is true. It's our cutoff point for what we're willing to believe. So we established this decision rule. We could, instead of using the p-value and significance level comparison, we could use a critical value. And that's when we said, before we even start the test, let's find a z critical value on the lower side. If it's a two-tailed test, a z critical value on both sides, or upper side, lower side, whatever type of test you're doing. And we're going to have a rejection decision based on whether or not our test statistic falls in that rejection region. Okay, so we talked about accepting versus failing to reject. We just say we fail to reject. Your textbook gives this interesting example. Failing to convict a defendant doesn't mean we believe that the jury believes the defendant is innocent. The jury is just saying not enough evidence to convict. Same logic with fail to reject the null hypothesis. So we set up a significance level, we set up rejection regions, and after we've done that and in fact made our decision, we can be a little more exact. We can go and find the p-value, which is the exact probability of that particular outcome. In our realtor example, we found that exact probability was 3.29%. That's the percentage chance that the realtor is telling the truth. It measures the probability that if the null hypothesis is true, we would randomly produce sample results as least as unlikely as the sample result that we actually produce. Alright, test procedure. 1, state the null and alternative. Choose your test statistic. Are you going to be using the z table or the t table? Compute the value of the test statistic. That's how many standard errors your sample is above or below the mean. Apply the appropriate decision rule and make your decision. 2 versions of decision rules. We can either set up those critical values beforehand with the rejection regions, or we can just compare the p-value to the significance level. And if the p-value is less than the significance level, reject. Okay, the one thing we haven't quite covered yet, there's a possibility of error. So, that realtor example, that initial one, we said, there's only a 3.29% chance that the realtor is telling us the truth. So you know what? I'm going to send him a nasty letter. I'm going to cancel my contract with him. I'm going to say, I don't believe you. I think you're telling me bad information. That's our decision. What's the likelihood that we're wrong?
The 3% there might be chance.
Yeah, what's the chance? Tell me the chance percentage that we're wrong. Is it a low chance we're wrong or a high chance we're wrong?
Low chance.
Low chance we're wrong. Yeah, we have pretty convincing evidence that we are right and the realtor is giving us bad information. So there's a low chance that we're wrong. And what is that exact percentage low chance that we're wrong?
The same.
3.29, yes.
Right.
Yes. There's a 3.29% chance that we're wrong. Alright, when we smash that realtor's desk, say, I'm out of here.
So interesting enough, there might be a possibility of 3% that person is not lying, but the same 3% might be an error?
Well, it's just, yeah, the realtor is telling the truth. There's always a chance you're going to get a bizarre sample outcome. And in this case, there's a 3.29% chance you'd get a bizarre sample outcome. That's what the realtor is going to say. All right, so if we reject a true null hypothesis, aka say, realtor, you're lying, then we have made a type 1 error. It's possible we made a type 1 error. So if the null hypothesis is true, the realtor really was right, and we reject his hypothesis, then we have made a type 1 error. Rejecting a true null hypothesis. And there was a 3.29% chance that we may have made a type 1 error. Now a type 2 error we generally don't make, because a type 2 error is accepting a false null hypothesis. But remember, we don't do that. We don't accept a null hypothesis. We only fail to reject. Statisticians don't make type 2 errors for the most part. The one we concentrate on is the type 1 error. All right, what are the chances when we reject the null hypothesis, we cancel our contracts, we move our business, we get a new machine? What are the chances that we made a mistake? Well, that's our p-value specifically, but the significance level is the maximum probability of making a type 1 error. So say my significance level is 10%, then I have a 10% chance going in that I'm going to make a type 1 error. So if it's very costly to make a type 1 error, meaning I might have to get a new machine, cancel my contracts, then you would want a very low significance level, a low chance of making that type of error. Good? Type 1 error, type 2 error. Okay, just a couple of nuances with two-tailed tests. Two-tailed test is going to be an equality, so there's going to be two ways to disprove an equality, either really high sample data or low sample data. So we split the significance level in two in our rejection region for each tail. So we have an upper and lower critical value. We calculate the test statistic just the same way we did previously. Once we find the p-value, once we find the area under the curve, or the chance of being that high or low, we need to know what are the chances of being that far away, that extreme. So we need to double the area under the curve, and we make our decision based on whether or not this test statistic falls in that rejection region, or whether or not the p-value is less than the significance level. Okay, there we have it, two-tailed test, two rejection regions, two critical values. Now, one thing I'll remind you of, I know it's late, but I'll just remind you of what we talked about at the very start of class, is we could have approached this differently. We could have said, let's find a sample mean, let's build a confidence interval, just like we have in previous classes, and if our confidence interval includes what the realtor says, then we'll say, okay, we believe you. If it does not include what the realtor says, we say we don't believe you. That's the exact same math, exact same type of logic, we've just posed it a slightly different way. In the real world, we are generally not given the population mean, or excuse me, the population standard deviation. So when you do not have the population standard deviation, you need to make two adjustments. One, you use the T table, which is going to be a little bit wider. It's going to give you a wider sort of cushion to account for unknown factors. And you will also calculate your own sample standard deviation. Process, everything is the same. That's the way you calculate the t-stat. Rejection rule, one-tailed, two-tailed, all that stuff, exactly the same. Remember using a test statistic on the t-distribution with n-1 degrees of freedom. And this last slide just mentions that it's a little bit harder to calculate p-values for the t-distribution, just because we don't have a full table. We just have one page rather than 2 full pages. But you can still do it. The process, the logic is all the same. Any questions at all? Right, you made it through. Congratulations. I'll be here for a little bit if you have any questions. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week.
Can I
Next.
see the board?
Oh, you want to see the board? Yeah, yeah. Next week is, it's just hypothesis tests for proportions, proportion differences, and means. Remember how a few weeks ago we went through that same process? We did means, and then we did proportions, proportion differences, and means. Same thing next week. So, not a lot of new information, just looking at this in a different form. Look forward to seeing you next week. Yes.
What is the name of the company that you're doing the
Spaces.
How social media
Yeah, all capital letters. Spaces. Google Spaces. Parking. New York City. It's like a yellow. Slogan.
Any questions?
No, you can't like hear the numbers that have
Yeah, please send me an email. Just follow up with me on that.
Oh, yeah, during, yeah,
Did you have any questions about?
yeah, and 6, those were the two.
So then there's like 12.
4 months.
Yeah.
I was just making sure.
Yeah, no,
Conference call, meeting.
just the exam.
Because this is gonna be on kind of like a
Exactly. Is there more business?
There's a lot of them. There's about 10 or 12. but what is it?
Good.
Yeah, yeah, so then maybe, like, you would then tell us to do that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, actually do me a favor. Spaces. So spaces.
So they have.
Over for fun. Take a look at it.
And
Yeah, I looked at it. I'm still very interested.
I heard that.
Okay, good. Look
Yeah,
up.
we're good.
Look up. Which part appeals to you? The marketing, the analytics, or the evaluation?
The reason why I became a major,
Yeah.
and I think this terms live in job applications, so that's only part of one thing.
Great. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's great. So there's just all the traditional, like, you know, how would you value
For social media,
like cash flow, ratios, all that stuff. But this is a different sort of view.
Is it how many people use the app? Or how, I think,
Yeah.
you know, and so either that versus that, or they go together.
Your break.
You know what I mean? Are they against each
I've
other?
got, so all classes
Yeah, so
Or
it's
are
like
they combined together to evaluate them?
yeah, it could be, you could evaluate based on revenue, profit, users, active users.
Because Facebook is a bunch of users.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do they actually, the thing is that you're clicking on
Yeah.
No, and I think.
Alright, have a nice day.
Good.
So basically,
That sounds good. Yeah, look more.
when it's more.
Send me an email, say I looked at them, I'm still really interested. That's cool. Thank you.
It's good. Social media, right?
Are you okay? So this next week,
Just,
right?
phone.
Exams. You're
So
not,
you have
another
social
class?
media, you
Yeah.
have.
Which
Yeah,
aspect?
I'll do this one.
When someone.
Great. Look them up. Spaces, marketing, city, just look around at their values.
You know, the last, very last
Next
minute,
day,
chose to go
you get it,
overseas.
and you're like,
The company.
Now,
and you write a review back and you say,
Business.
this company
Yeah,
partner,
Spaces, just
and
Google
you had
Spaces,
an
you
issue
might
and
see.
it's
I
together in
imagine
that way,
Number
it's
of
like
pictures,
that.
fine.
right there.
That's the good is
I'm gonna start remembering that another
the direct
person.
approach, where you go to them
Yeah,
directly.
you know,
And then the
I was
post,
talking,
because
I
maybe
was telling the person that I wouldn't
the thing is,
mind.
a company
I
that
don't
tells
think
you
it's
not
gonna fit because I'm an accounting major.
the
I've been
posting, they
taking
don't want to
other
post
classes,
it, you know, like they will post it on their
federal
website, wherever
taxes,
it was.
and advanced
Where
accounting
originally it
probably
was posted,
is
like,
in one
you
semester.
originally posted it as a tweet.
And then I know a lot
They
of
respond to you, they respond on a tweet, but they don't respond to you.
But it's just that I'm
And then when
accustomed
they
to
say
that
that
kind
the
of stuff,
case
so I
has
think
been
it wouldn't
resolved,
be
and
an
they
issue.
say,
That would be my argument.
right?
But hopefully
Then
policy
you have
and
the ugly,
politics
right?
in college.
The, no, the bad. The bad is when you complain,
Oh my God, yeah.
they didn't listen, then you went back
Yeah.
and
They
complained
do
again.
something like that.
Imagine that I have to take it
And then
for
you
a
send them
semester
something
one
again,
class.
it's like a double.
I'm not even
complaint.
graduate,
They
you
didn't
know?
really
Complain
talk
twice.
too much about
So
it.
they said,
No,
no,
seriously,
they didn't
projects
say,
on
they
the
actually
website.
said
I have to
another
take 4
book.
classes out
So
of
now
So
you
much
just go
I
from
can't
there.
have one
So
extra.
then you
Because
go out and
you have to
start,
take taxes.
you know how to getting upset.
So
And
what
then
we
the
had a
account-
movement in the
where-
So that we
city
be forced.
People do buy.
Kind of thing you can
combine
say,
businesses,
but that's what they're trying
working
to
with
do,
initiative.
you know, like take one class per semester and step 2.
United didn't want to pay him back
Sounds
his
like
money.
exactly what
They
they're
tried to go through showing
Yo.
the United Power from
In terms of
the
looking
at
county.
spaces,
Once a semester.
NYC part,
You have to take 4.
and because if you need help, you know, you're still.
Does that mean 4 semesters?
People were watching from the airplane how they were going to go through the patrol.
I only have 2 more semesters to go. They should allow me to